It's going to be rather a funny video, this, because it's based on a session in the House of Keys, which is the Parliament in the Isle of Man, discussing climate change. And I'm going to have a bit of fun with it. I can't help it. Now, my dream has always been to be able to debate Ed Miliband in public. Oh, God, I'd love that. That'll never happen, I know. So this is the nearest maybe I can come to it, debate, interjecting in a parliamentary debate. Now, this is based on the 18th of June, this debate, 18th of June 2024. And I arrived there on the 20th for my big talk, which is now 3 one-hour videos. But before that, I'd released a number of videos explaining the mess that they'd made of the calculations in the Isle of Man. Now, if the government and the people in charge of the programme had come to me and said, well, please explain your point, let's try and get to the truth, I'd have the greatest respect for them. But they didn't. And in fact, even though I continued that campaign continually since the 20th of June, as have others, they just stonewall. They just stonewall everything. And that, I mean, I lose respect. And so I've got no respect for people who do that. So I've got no respect for all the speakers except one in this parliament, except one, who I've got a lot of praise for, actually. There are only 24 members of the parliament, 24. And this is why we're doing it in the Isle of Man, because, crikey, if we can't go to a country of just 85,000 people, which have got very direct links with the representatives, if we can't do that and win, well, where are we going to win? So that's the idea. And so throughout this, I'm going to have to poke a lot of fun and expose the stupidity of these people, because they represent sheep. They do. They just follow an agenda without even understanding what they're following. Anyway, here goes. Please enjoy. I'll try and make it as entertaining as possible, but I've only got the audio, so I will be adding some visual effects to explain my point. So sit back and enjoy. This is the House of Keys, Isle of Man, 18th of June 2024.
As amended, carried. Moving on to item 6, Climate Change Transformation Programme Annual Progress Report 23 to 24. I call on the Minister for Environment, Food and Agriculture to move.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Climate Change Transformation Programme Annual Progress Report 23-24 provides this court and the wider Manx community with an update on progress toward the actions set out in the Isle of Man Climate Change Plan 22-27.
Now, I am going to edit the voices. I'm going to cut sections out because there's a lot of boring stuff. But what we're about to enter at the beginning of the report is where they give themselves a pat on the back for how well they're doing. And this is common to pretty well all governments everywhere. They have to praise themselves on what fantastic progress they're doing. In this case, what progress they're doing to reduce the world's temperature by, if the alarmists are right, around about a 40th million of 1 degree centigrade. So yeah, some of you can't even measure, but let's give ourselves a pat on the back for that and all the virtual signalling we're doing. So that is this first section. I'll let it play for a bit.
I would like to begin by thanking all of the officers across government who've contributed towards the progress made in this reporting period. It is thanks to the collective efforts of our teams that progress is good, and I'm able to stand today to present a positive annual progress report. The Energy Doctors and Energy Efficiency Scheme have gone from strength to strength, getting £790,000 worth of energy-saving measures directly to people who need them, reducing their bills and their emissions.
They're now going to introduce carbon literacy training, which is basically brainwashing. It's taught by people who haven't got a clue in any sort of depth what they're talking about to people who are just innocent victims being brainwashed. But here we go. It's an easy point to prove. Just ask any teacher or student on this course what temperature they would save by their actions, what difference it would make to the world. Because what's missing from the whole thing is any sort of benefit analysis cost. We know about this huge cost coming, but we don't know about the benefits, except virtue signalling by one country's politicians to another. But this is simple brainwashing.
Carbon literacy training, an accredited course used by the UK government and adapted for the Isle of Man, has been launched and is now being rolled out across the public sector. The training is available to all public bodies, with over 300 people trained so far in the public sector. This training will help attendees to understand how and why our climate is changing and how they can effectively support Manx climate action. A climate impact assessment tool has also been launched for use by public bodies to help to integrate climate and sustainability into policy development and decision making. It's worth taking a moment to highlight several other notable pieces of work that are underway, including planning the decarbonisation of the government estate, the Peatland Partnership and Restoration Project, an Isle of Man Climate Change Risks and Opportunities Report and Adaptation Strategy, a land management framework, and the Farm Carbon Calculator.
Now, whether you know it or not, a complete change in lifestyle is coming your way with all this nonsense. And one of them is the Farm Carbon Calculator. They've already appointed your government, a nicely salaried person to go round and count the numbers, to count how much carbon your farm is producing, and then tell you how to farm. They're going to not just tell you how to farm, they're going to restrict your transport as well. In the UK at the moment, we are having the British motor industry closed down. It's going the same way as the steel industry, as we totally deindustrialise to follow this mantra like sheep, literally like sheep. And this carbon calculator for farms is a way of controlling every aspect of your life, farmers. Stop it. Resist it. There's no need for it. Watch my talk. I explain that methane and carbon is not the issue now. And the actual science is there. And had these people actually bothered, although some of them said they would come, there were seats reserved for them at my talk, but they didn't turn up. Only one person did, and I respect him for turning up. But there was another person who turned up, I know, who I'll be dealing with later, who I'm very much in support of, because, believe it or not, you've got one voice of reason in your parliament. I'll be featuring it later in this video. But please stop this nonsense where we count carbon. Carbon is the oxygen of life, if you like. It's what you need to grow the crops. It's part of our life. You're made of it. And what they're going to do is, if they control it, they're going to control every aspect. They're going to tell you when you can have power. The costs, of course, of power are just zooming up. You're paying to get green energy. Your government admits in a Freedom of Information request, admits, and here it is, that green energy is more expensive. So on one hand, when you do a Freedom of Information request, it's more expensive, as it is here, importing it from the UK at an incredibly high price. But no, you plan to get rid of your gas after 29 by 2030, and then import very expensive. Now, that was based before the latest round of renewable costs in the UK, which have now gone up 66% on, let's say, wind. And so you're going to be paying much more than 170 odd pounds per megawatt. You're going to be paying 3, 4, 5, 6 times the price you should be paying to come down that interconnector. Why? Because you get a green certificate. If it was cheaper, everyone would be rushing to do it. They wouldn't need subsidies, would it?
The transition to net zero provides us with an incredible opportunity to create change that improves life on our island for everyone. Making the right decarbonisation choices and creating a reputation for sustainability will support local businesses, attract people to our island, bolster our economy, protect our community from the harmful impacts of climate change, and improve quality of life.
This reputation for sustainability is a thing between politicians, keeping face, showing off to your fellow politicians in other countries, etc. It wasn't to do with attractiveness of the island. People don't say I'm coming to the Isle of Man because they have sustainability, because it means nothing anyway. So I don't think the reputation matters, except for those who want to do some posturing. Well, as regards bolstering your economy, just look at it. From the point of view of tourism, you're going to have these industrial complexes. They call them wind farms as a matter of marketing, but they're not farms. They're industrial complexes, plonked all over the place, plonked in the middle, so everyone can see. They are farms that damage your environment, damage the bird life, damage the bat life, damage the insect life. There's nothing good about them that way, and they certainly don't bolster your economy. They will tend to spoil the look of your island, and as you add more, it'll become terrible. And of course, what's going to happen is a significant and big increase in the cost of energy, in the cost of electricity. And that increase in energy is going to damage your economy. The foundation of any thriving economy in the world is cheap energy. And you'll be abandoning that in every way. And then thirdly, protect you from climate change. Well, actually, if the entire world stopped producing carbon, then the alarmists state that it'll be about maybe half a degree centigrade saved. But that's not going to happen anyway. The world's going to continue. We're burning more fossil fuel now in terms of coal, oil and gas than ever in the history of humanity. That is a fact. And so to protect you is meaningless. This scheme you've got will produce, using the calculations, 1/40th million of 1 degree centigrade reduction in temperature. And that's if they're right. But as I explained in my talk, they're not even right. So you're getting no benefit at all from protection. You only have to look at the British car industry. In the UK, the steel industry's gone. Now the car industry is in collapse. And even Volkswagen, that marvellous car industry in Germany, they're looking at actually stopping production of car manufacturing in Germany. The West is just destroying its economies. And you're joining in this suicide pact. And all your politicians are doing is doing this copy and paste speech writing. That's meaningless. And I will be exposing their ignorance as we carry on in this analysis of what they've said in your parliament. Thankfully, the computer broke down and that lady stopped doing her speech, and so they handed over.
Call on the honourable member, Mrs Caine.
Thank you, Mr. President. We began our journey to net zero in earnest in 2019 when the climate emergency was acknowledged in this place.
Yes, climate emergency. Ask any of your MHKs to define what it is. Because I know lots of people who have asked dozens of councils in the UK who have announced a climate emergency to ask what it is. And if you don't know what it is, how do you know when it's over? This is total poppycock, total nonsense. There is no climate emergency. No one can define it.
Since then, numerous consultations, surveys, a citizens' forum, and multiple engagement programmes have repeatedly shown that climate change is an important issue for our island community, with 76% of island residents thinking climate change is important and 62% wanting the Isle of Man government to be doing more to reach net zero.
That wasn't a proper survey that was done for that. There wasn't a survey of Isle of Man residents as a whole done properly. People use this, politicians use this sort of thing to disguise and force through their policies. A bit like this chap here maybe sums it up. It's 10 o'clock and 77% of the people think all is well. Well, in this case, they're deceiving themselves. If they ask the question of the population, do you want to have these industrial wind turbines all over the place? Do you want to have road through swamps and ruin nature? Do you want to chop up the owls in the forest and all sorts of bird life and bats, of course? Do you want to increase your electricity prices and have all this make no difference whatsoever to the weather at all? Then if they ask that question, I think the answer would be the other way around.
This shows that we have a strong public mandate for delivering climate action. 20 of the 24 incumbent members of this House ran for election with manifestos that included climate action. We were elected to deliver that action. And to quote my honourable colleague, Mr. Peters' manifesto, honourable member for Middle, climate change needs common sense action that helps us, the people, adapt and change. Hear, hear.
The words common sense and climate alarmism don't really go together, because common sense is if the entire world, including China, India, the lot, just stop producing CO2, the alarmists say it's less than a degree C difference. And even that's not true. You get all these climate models at different predictions based on incredible different sensitivities, but they make no difference. I mean, what I'm listening to here are cut and paste, that's what I call them, cut and paste speeches, with people just using cliches, connecting together to give a case, something they have no understanding of. And if they did, why didn't they come to the hall that night and just decimate me? Why don't they actually debate? Why don't they debate? And the reason is they don't know the subject. And as I take what's being said in your Parliament apart, you'll begin to understand just how bad this is. This is just repetitive nonsense that you're being given in your Parliament, except for one member who later on I've got a lot of praise for. But as we go on, you'll understand more and more just how fake what you're being told is.
Although, of course, we may have different opinions on the necessary action and the research required to put that into place. Now, I'm aware, I thank the Honourable Minister for quoting from my foreword, but I'm aware that criticisms have recently been levelled against our approach, and in particular against the report and my foreword in it.
You can say that again, lady. The criticism is you've got your maths wrong. And instead of you actually understanding that, you just stonewall the criticism. You can't face it, can you? The facts are that you were claiming costs that were totally unrealistic and giving them out in a brochure to your public. The facts are you're claiming yields from your little wind farm. You're claiming yields that are totally impossible. Not only impossible, but would break all world records, and I mean that anywhere in the world. Up to 74% from your 20 megawatts of turbines. Not possible. And then you've got consultants appearing on from your sustainability centre who have taken apart on videos, plus your Danish consultant with idiotic claims about spending £20 million to only needing 1 or 2 hours backup by battery. What ludicrous nonsense is this? You need to have many days of backup, probably actually at least 9 days or more. And the cost in batteries, 3.7 billion for the Isle of Man. Totally impossible. You're living in a total dream world. And, I'm making these claims out in the open. I'm coming out in the open as an individual, not being paid for it, not making any money. In fact, it's cost me. So instead of you listening to that and saying, well, let's check. No, you stick in your little flock of sheep and bar away rather than actually discuss the matter. And that is why I've lost respect.
I would caution honourable colleagues against falling for disinformation disguised as science. I am frankly disheartened that at this point in our journey, still to feel it necessary to address denial. The weight and quality of the evidence is such that denial is a waste of the precious time we have left to secure a livable future. The science that guides our way forward is supported by an incredibly high level of consensus amongst the global scientific community. Of the 88,125 peer-reviewed scientific papers on climate change, only 8 were sceptical of human-caused climate change.
When I was in the Isle of Man, I started my talk with both appeals to authority, which is what this lady's doing, and scientific consensus, which doesn't exist in science consensus. But what you're about to hear is a total distortion of the truth, with 80-odd thousand scientists, 99% plus, agreeing that on what? She doesn't state actually what they agree on for a start. The funny part is, I'd be in the 99% on what they think, but I'm going to take this little survey of hers apart. And this is what you're doing. You take and totally distort a ridiculous survey and then claim 99%. Maybe in just the same way that the lady is claiming this fantastic support on the Isle of Man for this programme when they don't know the costs. Unless you tell people the costs and the consequences and everything of what you're proposing, they can't make a reasonable judgment. That is common sense, and that is what's missing. So now we're going to go into the comfort of the flock of sheep with this consensus report. And had they been there that night, they'd have realised how the consensus is just a rubbish argument. But I'll start off with this famous statement on what consensus is in science, and then I'll take her apart. Consensus has no place in science. Historically, the claim of consensus has been the first refuge of scoundrels. It is a way to avoid debate by claiming that the matter is already settled. Whenever you hear the word consensus, a scientist agrees on something or other, reach for your wallet, because you are being had. The work of science has nothing whatever to do with consensus. Consensus is the business of politics. Michael Crichton, 2003. I couldn't have put it better myself, which is why I've used that quote. So now let's listen to what this lady has to say about the consensus that she feels comfortable staying inside the flock in.
If more than 88,000 highway engineers told you that a bridge wasn't safe to cross, but 8 told you it was fine, would you still go across that bridge?
Here, when people are talking about staying inside the safety of the flock, like this lady, she takes the wrong subject. She's talking about the science there, yet my criticism against the government all the way through has been the sharp edge of the arrow. My criticism is one thing. It's that your maths are wrong. The claim costs are wrong. It's as simple as that. I mean, for the government to be right, you're going to have the whole world looking at the Isle of Man saying, how did you manage to get the record yields out of your wind farm? More yield than even the highest yield ever achieved offshore with floating wind for a time. More yield than any other onshore farm in the world. More yield than any offshore farm. More yield by a mile, almost double the yield of the offshore farm, which always produces more than on land, that you can see from the Isle of Man. That is my criticism. A maths one. Just sit down and do it with me. It's easy. But no, you don't. What you could do is go on to the second part of my talk, which is about the false science. But I'm going to deal with this survey now.
The evidence, research and modelling are high quality and robustly peer reviewed. There are, of course, areas of uncertainty which scientists globally are continually working to reduce. Our work is to keep pace with new information as it becomes available and to adapt our approach accordingly. Protecting our community and ensuring that our island and its people thrive is at the heart of everything we do. Our ongoing transition to net zero will continue to be informed by consultation and engagement with our community and the most up-to-date and robust climate science.
Well, this is the actually environmental research letter that started this nonsense about 99% consensus, and was published in 2021. It's environmental research letters. Anyone can find the paper. And I'm going to explain it to you all now to show you the deceit implicit in what that lady has just spoken about. So first of all, they take 3,000 abstracts, that's like summaries of research papers, from a population of research papers in universities, etc., where you only get funding for one way. There is no funding for the other way. Right? So you take a totally biased 3,000 abstracts. That's a beginning. But you take that out of the 88,000 she's talking about, 88,125. So it isn't 88,000 in any event. It's actually 3,000. And when you come down to it, it's actually about 2,800 they used. So this 88,000 is not true. And as regards going over a bridge, and I am a chartered engineer, as regards going over a bridge, we're not asking you to go over a bridge, we're asking the government here to honestly report costs, right? The thing in front of you is not life or death over a bridge. The thing in front of you is whether you're going to spend a huge amount of money and destroy your landscape and economy for the sake of nothing. That is actually the choice. But let's get back to this research. So it's under 3,000, right? And they actually had to categorize those papers. Now, the incredible thing here, and you've never heard of a survey like this before, they didn't ask a question. No, there was no question, do you believe this or do you believe that? Oh, no, not at all. It was going to be done randomly by selecting words on a computer. They then searched for keywords. But in my work, if I stated the opposite, which I often do, I say, well, climate so-and-so is caused by this, is the claim. But you can just take that without getting the words is the claim, which is totally opposite to what I was meaning. So this key word is just nonsense, but they classified them according to these levels here. Well, the first level there is explicit endorsement with quantification, and that means explicitly states the humans are primary cause of recent global warming. Right, that's the first level, which they try to get from keywords. The next level is explicit endorsement without quantification. An example explicitly states humans are causing global warming or refers to anthropogenic global warming climate change as a known fact. Well, I'd be in that, because if anyone listened to the science, I mean, even farming that we started thousands of years ago has a change on the climate. And CO2 is a greenhouse gas. So I'm into that myself. So anyone who took the care to actually attend my speech, or you can watch the 3 1-hour sessions, which are now on YouTube, will see how I explain that in some detail. But these people aren't interested in the science. These people are just like sheep following a leader that's going to take you all over the cliff, mind you. So when you start to look at that, yeah, I'm in the second level, and there's other levels below that which are weaker and weaker. And this is how they get the 99%. You know, I explained in my talk that the IPCC refute global warmings cause more floods, more droughts, etc. They refute it in their latest report. And it may surprise people that, but they do. It's not the scientists in the IPCC that are getting it so wrong. It's actually the politicians who write the summary for policymakers and then put a lot of their own stuff in there. It's headlines and stupid journalism and stupid governments that are doing this, and there's a reason behind it all. It's about a transfer of the money from the Western world to the third world. In the UK, we're getting rid of our steel industry. Germany's getting rid of its car industry. You could not make this up. Our worst enemies couldn't have dreamed of such a success of this policy. And to summarise this total distortion of science up, they produce this pie chart. But in the pie chart, they had the 18,000 and odd. They didn't even ask them. And don't forget, I'd be right up there as part of it. But again, this is a straw man argument put forward by this lady, because the criticism I'm making of your government is not to do with this. It's to do with the simply wrong maths. So if you were asked to cross a bridge where the engineer said, look, we're going to break all the engineering principles, it's a different bridge to anyone that's ever built it in the world. We can build it, so much better than anyone else in the world. And by the way, any serious engineer wouldn't agree with it, right? Then would you cross it? It's more like that. But words fail me. You shouldn't have a consensus unless you ask the questions and qualify it properly. If you have a political consensus and the vast majority, like 90%, don't take part, you'd say they're unknowns. You'd say, the consensus is this. You can't just leave out. In the previous one, where they said 97%, is actually the true one when you analysed it, and I dealt with this in my talk, was 0.3%. So this is it. I'm a member of Clintel, which is about 2,000 scientists who are totally opposed to all this climate alarmism mantra. So it isn't like you're being told. And this lady should really withdraw the use of this survey, because it is distorting and misleading your parliament.
But we are small. Yes, quite small in global terms. But climate change is a global problem, and we must be part of the global solution, along with the 195 IPCC member states around the world.
That is a distortion again. Not the 180 odd countries are taking part in it. We're today burning more coal than ever before in the history of mankind. Today we're burning more oil than ever before in the history of mankind. Today we're burning more gas than ever before in the history of mankind. So it's not a global problem that's being addressed, is it? It's just the part of the West that's committing sacrifices that will make no difference to the rapid growth of CO2. The whole thing is a con from top to bottom. Now, those are facts. Here, the graphs here show you we're burning more now than ever before. So what are they doing about that? Nothing. They're just looking inwards and punishing their own populations, our governments. And the Isle of Man is just following them like sheep. It's all going to fail. It's all going to fall down. And I hope I'm 80 in January, so I'm hoping I'll be alive to see it fall down, but I think I will, because this net zero nonsense will collapse. It's just not possible for it to go on.
Per person, our emissions and our GDP are high. This reflects our responsibility and ability in relation to tackling climate change. The climate is changing, and the world is changing with it. We've just experienced 12 months of global temperatures at 1.63 degrees above pre-industrial levels.
I'm very glad we are warmer than we were in the Little Ice Age. You know, the fact that we've come out and what she's saying at the moment is 1.6 something, well, that's pretty meaningless. You have to take the moving average, as it were, because that's weather. An individual year or 2 years is weather, or even a decade or so is weather. So you have to look at the pattern. That's climate. And we're about 1.4 or so above 1.5. It doesn't really matter. We have warmed from the Little Ice Age, and no one's disagreeing with that. And had she come to my talk, she'd have understood that, and we'd have gone into detail about it, because some of that is probably caused by mankind, by the way. I don't deny that at all. But most of it isn't, and we explain why. But most important of all is CO2's shot its boat, as it were. CO2 now it's like painting a wall red. After 3 coats of painting it red, other coats don't make it redder, and that's the effect of CO2. And though the other side doesn't disagree with that, they agree. What they talk about is the feedback, but that's all explained in my talk. But the facts are, again, this is total ignorance. This lady is ignorant, A, of the scientific process. She doesn't understand what consensus is in science, which it doesn't exist. She doesn't understand appeal to authority that you shouldn't do. You look at evidence and only evidence in science. And there is no evidence there that you've caused any problem. But she's trying to give the Isle of Man a guilt trip because your per capita CO2 is more. But no matter what you do, it makes no difference, because the world, like China, India and the Far East, etc., is going at it hell for leather. And I've already shown you that.
Our never-ending rain last winter was made 10 times more likely by climate change.
An absurd statement. In actual fact, I cover all these things in my talk, and I use the official Met Office records for rainfall. But can I just say, we had a huge underwater explosion with a volcano in Tonga that put huge quantities of water vapour into the atmosphere, and particularly the stratosphere. And that can take years to affect things, so you have to allow for things like that. But if you look at the overall picture, to explain that, what I'm going to do now is take a clip out of my talks that I gave in the Isle of Man, out of that one-night talk, to do with rainfall. It gives you a perspective on it. This lady hasn't a clue what she's talking about, just quoting headlines. It's just like rainfall. We have actually increased rainfall average since 1850, but at the same time, we've reduced the extremes. So we don't get the big droughts of the 1800s, nor do we get the big floods of the 1800s. The range has become less. We have less extreme weather.
And recent research by a Harvard professor shows that each 1 degree C increase in global temperature can be linked to a 12% decline in global GDP.
Comment: a 12% decline in global GDP from a 1 degree rise in temperature. But we've had 1.5 degrees since 1850, roughly. And look at the graph here. You know, nothing else but GDP growth. In fact, it's the fossil fuels, of course, since 1850 that created that. Now, think about what the lady just said, because it really does rank as an extreme thing. A 12% drop in GDP is enormous. It's like a huge worldwide recession on a grand scale. Absolutely ridiculous. So here again, look at the graph here and look at the GDP growth and think about it. When have we had anything else but a thriving civilization when it's been warm? We had the medieval warm period, the Dark Ages when it was cold. We had the Roman warm period, and then we had previous warm periods. And those warm periods was when civilization prospered. And basically a 1 degree C change now, from today say, would move the temperatures, because it doesn't change the rise in temperature, don't really change the tropics. The change in temperature always from the extremes, from the Arctic and Antarctic inwards, and it would actually raise the tree line, if you like, in the north by about 80 miles for every degree, rule of thumb. That would be an enormous amount of land all around the globe created, extra food, extra land that's usable, etc. It's the exact opposite. But this comes into those categories where you get these alarmist things like climate change is affecting, the breeding of sparrows in East Sussex or something. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I put her to proof on that. But she can produce any such of alarmist stuff like this because she hasn't a clue what she's talking about.
As I speak to you here today, the atmospheric carbon dioxide levels stand at 427 parts per million. Before 1911, and for the 800,000 years before that, this figure had never risen above 300 parts per million.
What she doesn't explain there, of course, it used to be 7,000 parts per million when life really boomed on Earth back in the Cambrian period. And I explained all this in my talk. I really did. And don't forget, here's the real point here. Most of our plants actually evolved in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels in parts per million of over 1,000, maybe 2,000. 1,000 to 2,000 was the typical range our plants evolved in. And because of this, they're now in an effect, a carbon CO2 drought. And because of that, we pump CO2 into the greenhouse to make all this terrific growth. So the evidence is historically, absolutely, historically, levels used to be much, much higher in the thousands, right? And what they're doing is distorting the information to the layperson who's thinking, 100,000 years is a long time. It isn't, not in evolution terms. And so, again, total misrepresentation of the facts.
If we ignore the science or allow ourselves to be distracted by misinformation, we are taking a huge risk. If we do not at least catch up and keep pace with our neighbouring jurisdictions, we will be left behind.
In technology and science, you should always be open to criticism. You should always examine what's coming your way. Now, do not forget, and I'll remind you again, that my criticism of the Manx plan, of your net zero plan, is basically you've made a mathematical mistake. It's as simple as that. You're claiming this super world record that humankind has never achieved before, and you're actually refusing to even discuss it. You're stonewalling that issue. And all of this speech being given here in Parliament to date has been about the science behind CO2, etc., which, yes, I did deal with, and it is wrong what you've got, but it's not my main point. What you've done is a straw man argument here. The things that you're claiming are misinformation, and it's to do with videos I brought out before this talk in Parliament, it's not misinformation. It's about your mathematics that we refuse to recognise. So you are alone in the world, all out there, all by yourselves in the world, getting yields from your power, from your wind farm plan that no one else can even approach. And then you're telling me all this rubbish in Parliament. I mean, you're wrong on the rubbish in Parliament, but it's almost besides the point. It's a straw man argument, and this is what you do. And in science, if you're not open to criticism and debate in the science part, then you're not a scientist, because that's how it thrives. And as I said in my talk, up to 3 years ago, all the astrophysics books, everyone had the evolution of galaxies, the Big Bang and the evolution, all right. Everyone taught it right the way around. We put up the James Webb Telescope, bang, the whole thing goes. That's how science works, because what they found was all the astrophysics was wrong on that. They're having to rewrite the book. It's in turmoil, that scientific world. When they go to a professor, the journalist in Durham University, who's got the biggest astrophysics computer in the world, what does he say? And they say to him, you must be devastated. Not at all, he says. It's the most exciting time of my career. So a good scientist doesn't mind, because you're after the truth. The truth is not to do with you personally. What I'm doing is not to do with me personally. If I'm proven wrong, I'm better off being proven wrong than I was before. I'd rather not carry on in my ignorance. That's how science works. These people don't understand science. They have no understanding of it. But worst of all here, they're totally misrepresenting what my criticism of you in the Isle of Man's government is. And my biggest criticism is, having had a huge mistake pointed out, that you've misrepresented all the costs as a result of that to your public in your brochure. You just stonewall. And this is what ignorant people do. They just stonewall and come up with all this rubbish. Well, I'll carry on dealing with the other parts now before I finish this session inside the Isle of Man Parliament, which I'm rather enjoying.
Which will damage our economy and our international reputation. Permit me to provide a few sobering facts to this Honourable Court. Research has shown that the cost of mitigation will continue to rise. Delay increases costs.
I could go on taking her apart on every single thing she says, but this idea that if we delay the cost of mitigation is high is rubbish. In actual fact, all the studies show the exact opposite. The studies show that the cost of doing what you're planning, the cost is incredible. I mean, you are destroying all your industries. In the UK, we're destroying now our car industry, having destroyed our steel industry, and Germany, Volkswagen talking about moving out their production of cars from Germany. You're talking talking about total devastation of Western economies. That's what you're talking about. In actual fact, if they were right about CO2, and by golly they're not, but if they were right, then the cost of mitigation is far less to wait and just deal with the results of it. Far, far less. So, and this is just total brainwash people. Brainwashing. They've even got courses on brainwashing to brainwash people. Unfortunately, I know someone, a young man who started his first day in work and has had to conform to a climate change course, which he knows is rubbish because the company has to be certified for government supply to be doing this and doing that. This is how the world is now working. If you wanted to lead the world, just stop all this nonsense. Just keep your gas supply. Honestly, that is the best way to go by far. It's the cheapest form of production. I've already given videos showing you that clearly. Basically, if we increase the temperature by 1 degree C, we'll roughly, this is a rule of thumb, we'll move north the temperature zone. So everything, you'll be getting the temperature now that's, say, in the south of England. Yeah? And Scotland will be getting the temperature that you're in now, etc. So that's what we're talking about, by the way. Actually, you'd welcome it. So it's absolutely absurd what they're saying on every level. But now I'm going to move on to the next speaker, give everyone a chance for me to attack, if you like. And so what follows this, again, is a number of claims now that get so absurd, it's laughable. Here we go.
On the Honourable Member, Mr Henderson. But if we examine what Mrs Caine's just said, there are rising sea levels still happening. The ice caps are still melting. Every week on the news, you can see more chunks of them coming off. Chunks that are as big as Wales, for instance. That's going to melt and your sea levels are going to go up. Whole communities have disappeared in the South Pacific. They're now underwater. Populations have been displaced. So something's going on.
Well, that's nuts on steroids. Those are absurd claims. They're funny, actually. Let me just deal with this sea rise bit. First of all, I've actually sailed mostly around the world, right through the Atlantic, part of the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, across the Pacific in my own boat, on my own little boat with my wife. And I've come to islands only a metre high, you know. All the islands in the Pacific have grown on average by 8%. Not a single island in the world has had its population displaced by being overtaken by sea level. Not one. And he can't show me one, by the way. And here's some of the headlines from my talk. Because we can now measure size of islands by satellite, we can get very accurate results. Researchers have discovered that hundreds of islands appear to be growing in the Pacific Ocean despite the threat of rising sea levels. Scientists from the University of Auckland found that some islands have grown as much as 8% in size over the last 70 years. They used satellite images and data gathered on site to discover the changes, and the same's true for the Indian Ocean, etc. There isn't a single island, a populated island, that's gone under. There may be some little tiny little outcrops that come and go, like sand, islands that on moving beds, as it were, but there are no populated islands sinking. Tuvalu, which was the most prone island in the world, according to the IPCC and everyone, has actually grown by just under 3%, but they're still asking for more money in case they sink. So, and all this is now measured by satellite. It's for certain. So this is pure fiction. I mean, if you're going to have your parliamentarians reading the Daily Star and getting stories out of that to alarm you, fine, that's what you've got. But what you haven't got is people who are telling you the truth. I believe he believes this. I believe he's an honest man who believes it, but he's wrong. Not just wrong, but he really should be checking things before he says things like that in Parliament. So here is a section from my talk on what the IPCC themselves say. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UN panel, the leading authority, if you like. What do the scientists there say about all this extreme weather? And here's a section from my talk.
Have you ever heard of the IPCC? Sir, have you ever heard of the IPCC? Do you think that's an authoritative body?
Yeah.
Good.
So what does the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change say from the UN? Well, don't forget, they are a government panel, a political panel, not scientists. What they say and the data they have are two different things.
Now I'm going to use this report. You want references. It's table 1212 And that's why I couldn't answer this gentleman's question over there before, because I was dealing with it. But table 1212, page 1856, the latest report from the IPCC. And it's a table, and down this column is about where they happen to be able to detect no signal at all from man affecting these things. Yes? So where you've got a white block, where you've got a white cell, there's no signal, right? Hard to read, so I'm going to list them for you now in the video. Okay? So no trace from mankind historically with frost, mean precipitation, that's rainfall, river floods, heavy rainfall, that's heavy precipitation, pluvial floods, that's urban floods in cities, etc., landslides, aridity, that's very dry air, hydrological droughts, agricultural and ecological drought, fire weather, that's conditions for forest fires, wind speed, severe windstorms, tropical cyclones, that's hurricanes, etc., sand and dust storms, snow, glacier and ice sheets, heavy snowfall and ice storm, hail, snow avalanche, coastal sea flood, coastal erosion, marine heat waves, and ocean acidity, air pollution, and last of all, weather radiation at the surface. So, with all of those, there is no evidence whatsoever to date of mankind having influenced on all those characteristics with the climate. But what do they claim we have interfered with? Now let's take a look at that. So they claim there are differences in the heat and cold section, I'll go into detail soon, snow and ice section, and open ocean section. Let's take a look at the actual list where the differences are. So this is where they found evidence in the historic record of mankind interfering with it. Of course, any change has to be down to mankind. They found it in mean air temperature, extreme heat, cold spell, permafrost. So far, all those are related to temperature, the permafrost melting, etc. there. Lake, river and sea ice, not ocean, but lake, river and sea ice, mean ocean temperature, ocean salinity and dissolved oxygen. Now, the key here is that all of those are related to one thing, that's changes in temperature. Okay? Cut it short there. So, the IPCC agree in the data, so how the hell do they issue and scare everyone for all those things?
And the other thing, Hector, any heavily polluted area, such as cities, London, Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, to name but a few in England and elsewhere, have a considerably higher death rate or mortality rate, especially for heart attack patients and respiratory patients. Common indicators of high pollution, and that's rising all the time. Cases of heat stroke are rising all the time. The medical graphs are in all the medical journals. You can plot it through. So,
oh dear, oh dear. First of all, can I explain something? CO2 itself is not in any way a pollutant. By golly, if it was, you'd be in trouble, because you breathe it out. The air around in the air is 420 odd at the moment parts per million, and you're breathing it out at 40,000 parts per million. You breathe in air and you expel CO2 at 40,000 parts per million. So that in itself is not a pollutant at all. People live in 8,000, 7,000, 8,000 parts per million in submarines. In the hall, when I gave the lecture at night, I had a CO2 meter, and it was about 3,500 parts per million then, because you have an audience. So CO2 is itself in not any way a pollutant. As regards people dying of heat strokes, people dying from severe weather, far more people, in fact 10 more people, 10 times the amount of people die of cold than compared to heat. But it's actually fallen. It's over 99% reduction over the last century in people dying from either heat or cold, as it were. So, but even then, what we're left with is a vast majority die from cold. How many people have died from heat stroke in the Isle of Man in the last 30 years? Yeah, and if they have done that, they've been very silly on a beach in a heat wave. Simple as that, But those heat waves are no more frequent, even according to the IPCC. They're not more frequent. So This is just misrepresentation and mixing up pollution. I'm very big on pollution, believe me. But you know, even the ULEZ scheme in London that they've introduced at great cost to the community, there's a report out this week showing the air quality hasn't changed at all. I'm all for removing pollutants in cities and the air. I'm totally behind that project. That's not to do with this. So don't conflate the two.
So everything we're all producing now in all our factories and everything else is sitting up there in the atmosphere, accumulating every day on top of what's already there. So it's exponentially getting worse and worse every day.
It is growing. There's no doubt about that, by the way. None at all, which is great news because we're having world record crops, world record cereals, world record rice as we begin to return, we tend to recover a little bit, just a little bit, mind you, from the CO2 drought. So it's the exact opposite of what he's claiming there. He's treating it as a pollutant. It's not. You're made of it. It's one of the gases of life.
And a thing that's missing in the report really is where I'm going to, sorry to be long-winded, is that we seem to have lost the green drive. And that's been highlighted in the UK press as well, where the impetus that started all the climate change debate, started all the climate change legislation, seems to have slacked off. And we're now talking about much the same thing all over again. But really, those carbon training initiatives should have been energising people and getting behaviour change. And I think that's what the department, Cabo, council ministers need to be looking at as the next phase, is to be energising people into changing their behaviour.
There, I totally agree with him. You know, some of the sanity is beginning to penetrate into this ridiculous mantra that is ruining our economies and ruining our way of life and putting control of your life in every aspect, your transport, how you heat your house, what you do, what car you can buy the lot. All of this is going to bring it crashing down. So he is right, we agree. So, with a bit of a fanfare, I'd like to introduce some common sense, some knowledge, some actual reality into your House of Keys, and I introduce now Stu Peters.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I promise not to speak for long, since you and all honourable members probably have a good idea of what I want to say about this report. Trust me, everyone, my life would be so much easier if I agreed with our global warming plans. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't continue my apparently lone stand against the nonsense and hypocrisy of the Isle of Man spending tens of millions of pounds on climate change. Climate change is natural, cyclical and driven by factors outside our control. We may as well sit on the beach and tell the tide not to come in. But for now, let's assume that everyone else is right about CO2 being the villain gas that's propelling us to a climate catastrophe, and forget that increased levels of CO2 will also allow greater global greening and crop production. Let's assume that global warming is not just alarmism from the exponentially growing climate change industry for its own benefit, and is actually going to raise average temperatures by maybe 3 degrees Celsius. And instead, let's consider what the Isle of Man's climate change legislation and this transformation programme has achieved. Remember, our job in this place is to agree on policies that, with very few exceptions, are designed to benefit the Manx population. My contention is that our response to climate change has been anything but. What we've done is take a global concern and prove that we're down with the kids like Greta Thunberg.
Now, in a Senate hearing in the USA, Greta was asked why she called for people to panic and what science has she got behind her beliefs. Here's her answer.
For a question, first of all, let me just clear that those are metaphors. In speeches, you often use metaphors. Of course, I don't mean literally that I want people to panic. So there was no scientific study that made me come to that conclusion.
There is no science behind her at all, but she's able to go around the world speaking to everyone from the head of the UN, all the heads of countries, the Pope and everyone with this nonsense. It's politics, not science, and that's what you're hearing in your House of Keys, except for this one man.
And we're wasting tens of millions of pounds on bespoke surveys, work streams and reports that could probably be cut and pasted from any other European jurisdiction. I am completely convinced that these tens of millions of pounds would be better spent in our schools, our health service and our infrastructure. Yet every government department is being told to spend less and do more because there's no money in the pot. The Chief Minister mentioned that earlier in his speech. We had to vote to put income tax up in the last budget to keep the health service running. What the Isle of Man needs right now is more doctors and dentists, not daft laws that will close down our fossil-fuelled power station in 6 years or force people to have expensive heat pumps rather than vastly cheaper gas boilers from next year. And remember, even the experts can see that heat pumps don't work particularly well in our climate. I skimmed through the Sister traffic plan last night. Like others, I only have time to skim it the night before this sitting because I wasn't aware of it until I saw an email from Mr. Thomas. And it appears to be a prime example of a make-work scheme that verges on totalitarianism. Again, for no tangible benefit, yet lots of suffering for our people. Again, our funding is being spent on statistics and glossy reports. When any department or board asks Treasury for funding, they have to provide a compelling business case with strong evidence to support that bid. Not climate change, though. That's an investment the max taxpayer is funding that won't save any of us a penny piece. It might make some of us feel warm and fuzzy that we're doing our bit to tackle global warming, but in fact we're doing nothing of the sort. The Isle of Man is like a grain of sand on a tennis court. We could stop emitting CO2 tomorrow and it would make zero difference. And speaking of CO2, very little of it is down to gas boilers or diesel cars. An increase in population from 1.7 billion at the start of the 20th century to over 8 billion today is probably the root cause of that, because all these people need homes and places to work and all the infrastructure and raw materials processing that go with that. Rotting food from overproduction releases more CO2 than cars, planes or boilers. What we should stop tomorrow is spending all this money for no return. The free market, consumer demand and technological progress will drive a cleaner, greener and more sustainable future. And nobody's against that. That's a great thing. Let's have some of that. So it should be for consumers to decide whether they want heat pumps or electric cars, with a gentle nudge by government if needed, rather than the draconian policies that we're foisting upon people now. Let's build wind turbines if the numbers stack up, but because they'll give us an element of energy security and cheaper bills, even if only when the wind is blowing. And not because it makes us look virtuous. Let's support the less well-off to install solar panels to bring their energy costs down. And let's do what most of our neighbours have already done and classify natural gas as a transitional fuel so that our reassuringly expensive power station in Pulrose can run for decades when the sun don't shine and the wind don't blow. The world is now asking some serious questions about the cost of climate change spending. People are becoming more concerned with the cost and efficacy of the medicine than they are with the alleged illness itself. Many major motor manufacturers, for example, have abandoned an imminent all-electric car plan and are rethinking their fossil-fueled future. We need to do the same. Mr. President, it's time for us to stop strutting on the world stage and put our own people first, our own people. This report, with apologies to those behind it, who I'm sure mean well, is a classic example of ruinous and ultimately pointless bureaucracy at its worst, but I'm afraid that I'll be the only person in this court who won't vote for it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Now, to round off this video, I will let this speaker, Dr. Hayward, be the last one I critique, because I could go on with all of them, but I've taken the main ones here. And it was very sensible to listen to that man talking. I know that if you look at wind farms, that they're not viable because you need the gas to support them all the time. For every megawatt of wind, you need a megawatt of gas. It's as simple as that. And when you look at the cost of that, it's just ginormous. And this is why we've had to increase prices this last month in the UK for offshore wind by 66%. But now we're back to the last speaker I'm going to critique, Michelle Hayward.
Call on the Honourable Member, Dr. Hayward.
All of that.
Thank you, Mr. President. I look forward to following that. Actually, I am going to follow it, and I'm very slightly going to agree with Mr. Peters. But bear with me. I promise.
He's clutching his chin.
I think that this report misses, and yet it would be incredibly easy for us to do, is to include more Manx data that shows what the problem is and how it is already affecting us. For example, we are the proud owners internationally of the longest series of sea surface temperature recordings that anyone has around the world. That data runs back over 120 years. It goes back to the old Port Erin Marine Lab, and then it was picked up by government. And DEFRA now have a monitoring buoy out at the Cyprus site, which is just out off of Port Erin, monitoring sea surface temperatures. So we have the ability to show that over the last 20 years, those sea surface temperatures have increased, and they have increased steadily. We have a data set that is relevant to us.
Well, whilst I'm sure she means well here, again, it's the lack of knowledge giving you false information or false steers on it, as it were. So let me explain something. There's a thing called the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, and it means that the Atlantic temperatures vary on a cycle of temperatures, and it's quite significant actually, and in fact it's about 0.55 C. Now consider we've only warmed by about 1.3, 1.4 since 1850. This is significant, and don't forget the oceans hold 1,000 times more heat than the atmosphere. The oceans control the atmosphere. So let's look at the graph here. Now what happens is this oscillation occurs on basically around about a 70-year cycle, 35 years up, 35 years down. And the last warming started in the late 90s. And now it's time for it to cool. And golly, look what's happening this year. This alarm about cooling Atlantic. The Pacific's doing the same, by the way. So we've now got rapidly cooling spots appearing in the Atlantic. And it actually did start around the UK. And it's in the tropics as well now. Now this fluctuation is going to go on for a bit while it smooths out and goes into the proper cooling period. And so there's a perfectly understood climate phenomena that actually explains it. But no, what's warming over the last 20 years here in this graph, so let's be alarmed. Ignorance. All your MHKs were invited to my talk, and had they come, they'd have understood a lot more. We could have had proper, open discussions. They could have debated me. They could have brought evidence, maybe, or shown I was wrong, etc. And it's just so frustrating. There is one who came, and you can guess who it was. It's the gentleman who's just appeared talking sense, not because of what he learned from me. I think he knew it beforehand, but because he understands the issues, which I'm afraid these people don't. They're completely out of their depth. But the worst thing is not that. I'm sure they mean well. The worst thing is that through ignorance, they are imposing draconian measures on you, and they're cheating you about the costs. And when I point out, nothing to do with the science, when I point out your costs are all wrong because of miscalculations, they refuse to discuss it. Instead, I get personally attacked.
We can also get hold of data about things like travel disruption. How many times do flights get cancelled because of excess amounts of wind? We can get hold of data from our Met Office about the wind direction and strength, because one of the practical consequences of increasing the amount of heat that is in our atmosphere is that weather patterns start to become disrupted.
But extreme weather is actually less now than it was in the past. The worst droughts, the worst floods, the worst hurricanes, everything, well, in the past. Look, this year, NASA and all the alarmists forecast a terrible hurricane season. But they've only had five relatively small ones. It hasn't happened. I think they forecast 25. There's only a few weeks to go. So it's been one of the lowest hurricane seasons for 50-odd years. There is a reason for this, and I'll explain it in simple terms. Weather, and that's what we're talking about here, not climate. Weather is the difference between one place and another. Now, if you've got a difference in pressure, you get a wind. And if you've got a difference in heat, you get wind. So if it's the tropics are very different to the north. Now, as we've warmed since the Little Ice Age, the difference between the north, if you like, and the tropics is less. Less difference, the less need for a hurricane to take the heat from the tropics and distribute it. So the general pattern would be slightly less hurricanes because there's less difference in the heat. That's the overall picture. Of course, you can get odd variations in that, but that's the overall picture. But even the IPCC, as I've explained, don't blame extreme weather on so many things, floods, droughts, rainfall, and so on. It's not blamed on man. And this is just myth. There is no evidence. You haven't got your local data evidence. What you've got is an airport unit designed for aeroplanes coming in. And in fact, in the aeroplane manual, And in the airport manual, it states this can only be used for the use of aeroplanes. And you can't use it for temperatures because it's right alongside the runway and the heat retention in the runway is extreme. So it is nonsense, all this. Absolute nonsense. And so what she's trying to say is let's use our local data to prove it. But she's doing it through total ignorance of the facts on the subject. And that shouldn't be happening in your parliament.
We know that rainfall patterns are changing as well, and we have data on that. And there's some presented in this report, but it could have been handled perhaps a little bit better.
Well, I've already shown you the UK Met Office rainfall record going back to the early 1800s, when it was much heavier at the highs and much lower in the droughts, which was the case. And it's actually increased rainfall over time, as it will do as it warms, but it's actually less extreme. So, and this is natural. That is perfectly natural. But no, she's making it rainfall down to man-made climate change when there's no evidence whatsoever for that. But the evidence is the exact opposite.
And the reason I'm asking for this Manx data is to actually manage to demonstrate to Mr. Peters and to the others that actually this is very relevant to the island. It is relevant to help our residents understand the real and growing threats to our quality of life.
But if you examine the data she's talking about, it proves the exact opposite on the rainfall, on the wind, etc. And the temperatures of the sea. It's just ignorance trying to, because she doesn't understand the subject, means well, I'm sure, but this shouldn't be allowed in parliaments. People, most of your parliamentarians here don't understand the subject at all. And they're being led by some very misguided advice, I'm telling you now. But don't forget, I repeat, what I've come to the parliament with, if you like, is your maths are wrong on the costs and because the yield is all wrong. It's about 2 to 3 times more than you can get. And that puts the cost up some easily 2 or 3 times. Plus you've missed out a lot of costs. I could go on taking this lady apart, taking her arguments apart is what I mean, of course. And I could go on with others. But I think you've got the flavour of it now. You've got a parliament who don't know what they're talking about except for one man. However, when they come to take the vote, well, let's look at the vote at the end of this debate because it's interesting. Because in the previous vote to this, there was only one man who stood up against this nonsense. How many now have voted against?
Honourable members, we come to vote on this item. Item 6 as laid out on the order paper. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no.
No. Right.
Division called.
Extra in the House of Keys, 20 votes for, 4 against.
Well, that was pleasing. I mean, we got 4 against. I have no understanding of the reasons there that the other 3 voted. I know about the one, obviously. But 4 against. You only need another 9 to get a majority against. And I'm hoping that the silent MHKs will begin to understand you're heading down the wrong road. And why I have no respect for your government, why I have no respect for these people running this, and I don't have respect for them, is because they've stonewalled me on a simple miscalculation they've made on maths. And I'm happy to debate anyone. I mean, the chap you get from Sweden, I think, Dr. Quirk, I'm happy to debate him. I've done a video on him. I'm happy to debate him in a, online debate. And we can do that. We don't have to travel and we can publish it. I've got nothing to hide. I don't mind being wrong. But in this case with the maths, I know I'm right, by the way. And I know you're being misled as a public. Now, I do get passionate about this because it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating to have so much ignorance running a country. And my job is to try and help you. So all I'm asking, you're so lucky as a people. You only got 24 of them to vote in. And you can change that. You can really change it. You can start insisting. You can start writings to them saying, you must go against this. Or at least have an open analysis with me. Why don't they appoint someone to debate me? I'll do anything. There's no rules I won't agree to debate this because I've got nothing to lose and I'm not paid for any of this. And the reason I'm doing this is very simple. Even the county council we tried to do it with in Leeds is so enormous. Hundreds of thousands of people are involved and all sorts of parties and things, much more difficult. If we can get the Isle of Man to do it, then the Isle of Man can lead. And it can be used as a lever to show other people that, you really do need to stop and do something about this. Because if you don't, I'm telling you now, if you accept this whole argument, besides a math mistake, the control of your life is going to come, and it's going to come to your detriment. And your economy is going to be blasted. Thank you for watching.